Now joining us, former chief economist at the International Monetary Fund, current professor at Sloan School of Management at MIT, one of the people that writes for the very well-regarded financial blog, The Baseline Scenario, and the author of 13 Bankers, Simon Johnson. Professor Johnson, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right. First, I want to talk about an article you wrote today saying that Tim Geithner might be on the ropes. What gives you an indication that that might be the case?
Well, a couple of good sources indicate that the White House is at least considering asking people who might make a good successor to Tim Geithner. Now, the time frame is not at all clear. I don't think they're trying to get rid of him right away, but the very fact that this subject is being brought up by the top people in the administration suggests that a move is going to happen sooner rather than later.
And who do you think would be a good replacement for him?
Well, my suggestion is actually a guy called Tom Hoenig, who is the president of the Kansas City Fed. He is very tough on the biggest banks. He's the only Fed official, or actually government official, in the United States who's come out really clearly and consistently against these so-called too-big-to-fail banks. And he has a very good track record on other dimensions, too. I think he's also a Republican, as far as anyone knows, and he would enjoy a lot of Democratic support as well. So he would be able to get confirmed in the Senate almost without question.
Is there any prayer that a Democrat could ever get confirmed? I mean, we do have a Democratic administration, right? I mean, it seems like we're like, pretty please, if we give you a Republican, can you consider it?
Well, look, I proposed Paul Krugman for chairman of the Fed. I actually was fairly strenuously opposed to Ben Bernanke getting a second term, and put some effort into advancing the cause of Paul Krugman as an alternative. Krugman, of course, is a brilliant economist, got a Nobel Prize, and he's written super stuff at both a technical level and a broader, more popular level for 2 decades on the issues really central to what the Fed works on. It was Krugman himself wrote a quick rebuttal to me on his blog, saying, no, I would never get confirmed in the Senate. So perhaps I've given up on Democrats in the light of what Paul Krugman said, and I'm going with Republicans, working for Democrats.
Now, for the Fed position, I suggested Joseph Stiglitz when Bernanke was in trouble, another Nobel Prize winner and a former chief economist at the World Bank. The second person I suggested was you. But since you guys are clearly for financial reform, it appears you have no chance.
Yeah, that is a definite strike against you right now in Washington. I do think our time will come. I mean, the time of reform is the time for people who seriously want to change the structure of the financial system and who think that too big to fail banks are too big to exist. But that tide has not yet turned. There's a lot of debate. The President Obama's endorsement of the so-called Volcker rule, while I'm not sure the substance is there yet, has tremendous symbolic value and has put a lot of people on the wrong foot and on the defensive, talking about the corporate lobbies and so on. So it's a step in the right direction, but there's a long way to go.
You know, it's funny because I thought we voted for a guy who was pushing change in 2008, and I thought we gave him 60 senators and a gigantic lead in the House to work with, but apparently that wasn't clear enough of a message, so we got to wait a little longer for change. Okay. So let's talk about what's happening today then, about the times today, because it appears to me that Obama has made some tougher proposals, and I want to know if I don't want to get excited for the wrong reasons. We've already gone through that a numerous number of times already in the Obama administration. Are the new proposals, whether it's the Volcker rule or the bonus tax, or even the tax in getting the offshore accounts of the corporations, et cetera, are those actually tougher, and are they enough coming from the Obama administration? They
are a little bit tougher, but they're not enough. That's my bottom line. The Volcker rules, for example, say they want to cap the size of the biggest banks going forward, not allow them to get any bigger. Well, that's fine, but why would you think that after 30 years of crazy, unregulated growth, a massive crisis, and the most generous bailout in human history, that you have the right size for banks? It doesn't make any sense, does it? So the banks, I think, have to get smaller, and the specific way they want to make them, they want to hive off some of their activities, take away so-called proprietary trading. That's okay, but that's a very small chip off the iceberg. The banks will barely notice that one. And interesting, actually, the stories out of Davos this week was that when they had sufficient beers or vodkas, the bankers themselves came up quite easily with ways they would circumvent these restrictions.
And even that looks like it's going to get killed in the Senate. We have reports from numerous sources now saying Senator Dodd is negotiating with the Republicans in the spirit of bipartisanship to make sure we have no reform. So when you look at what the Senate is doing, is this the capture of the government that you were talking about?
Well, the capture of the government is very broad. It's certainly across the executive branch and in much of Congress. I do think that, again, opinions will change. I do think the mainstream consensus is shifting on this issue. So positions that I was taking and I and my colleagues were advancing a year ago, which perhaps were controversial and seen as radical by some other people at that point. Now we have a lot of people on board. Our book that you mentioned, 13 Bankers, has got endorsements from the left and from the right, from people in the financial sector and people who are, independent thinkers about these issues. So I think increasingly people are realizing that this is a major problem that can be dealt with, needs to be dealt with, and I think the consensus will change. It's not going to change in the next 6 months. That's not what happens to consensuses like this. It'll change over the next 2, 3, 5 years, but I think it'll move in the right direction.
You're a little more hopeful than I am. We're talking to Simon Johnson, former chief economist for the IMF, professor at MIT now, and the author of 13 Bankers. I saw the rave reviews for the book, and it makes perfect sense. And what you write about is intellectually appealing. But to me, that's not the question. The question is, do the people in power give a damn about what's intellectually appealing or what the mainstream consensus is? Because right now, if you look at the American population, the mainstream consensus is stop giving in to the bankers. Yet here we have Democrats as well as Republicans looking to find ways, every conceivable way, to help the bankers.
Well, you're right about that, and of course it's money talking there. The lobbies have a lot of money, and they have a tremendous amount of influence. But I think I put it like this: if you campaign for office, saying I want to build somewhat dangerous nuclear power stations, but don't worry because it'll give you really cheap electricity, you wouldn't get elected on that basis. People would say that's crazy. Or if you said let's not have any regulation over drugs, over pharmaceuticals. Let's just go back to selling on the street corner like we did 100 years ago. Again, you wouldn't get anywhere in the primary. And I think that's what has to happen, that's what will happen with regard to financial sector policy and attitudes towards the big banks. What is regarded as acceptable, sane, reasonable activity vis-a-vis these banks has to change and change dramatically.
One of the things, Professor Johnson, that captured my interest about your writings in the beginning was when you talked about your experience at the International Monetary Fund and how the United States now began to look like countries like Russia, et cetera, that were captured by an oligopoly. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. I've worked on crises and in difficult economic situations for 20, 25 years. And in many of these places, you have a form of oligarchy. So a small group of people who make a lot of money, one way or another. They have economic power, and they use that economic power to get themselves political power. It's a very old phenomenon, actually. Aristotle wrote about it a long time ago. And we've seen it many, many times in human history. And, of course, there's different versions of oligarchy. There's a President Suharto type of oligarchy, the kind they had in Indonesia, where it's very much about the man and his family. There's the Russian type of oligarchy, which, of course, is very much about, people who have access to coercive force and people who got their hands on oil and gas at critical moments in the recent past. And then there's the American form of oligarchy, which is not based on corruption or brute force, particularly, or perhaps at all, or even on buying favors, particularly. That's a mechanism they use. Mostly it operates through a form of intellectual capture and cultural persuasion, so that the banks, particularly the big banks, have convinced key policymakers and lots of mainstream people, even outside of Washington, that finance is good, unregulated finance is better, and completely unrestrained big finance is best.
I think the intellectual capture argument is very persuasive, especially as it regards to people like Ben Bernanke and Tim Geithner, who I think are, I impolitely say they are convenient tools of Wall Street. But when it comes to politicians and the Rahm Emanuels of the world, and Senator Dodd, and even President Obama, I don't think that they're that unsavvy. I think they see the macro picture, and the macro picture is, and this was the old way of doing things. I think things are changing now, as you say, but we get corporate money, lobbyist money. Republicans don't get it. We win elections. So there's a lot of that too. I think that's old school, that not bribes, but political bribes in a manner of speaking.
I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that there's a fair amount of that. It's ready money, and the Democrats have done well with it. But now they see the consequences, and people I talk to on Capitol Hill, many people, most Democrats, feel extremely uncomfortable about the situation they've got themselves into, and feel that the sort of basis of policy towards the financial sector really has to change dramatically. It will take a while, but I think it will head in that direction.
Let's talk a little bit about the book, 13 Bankers. First question that pops in everybody's head is, who are the 13 bankers? What does that mean?
Well, that we're not talking about. Sorry to be coy, but we're not giving that secret away until the book actually comes out. It's a book about the history of the financial sector in the United States, and it goes back to the beginning of the Republic, actually, and tries to put today's problems in a historical perspective. And I think it's very different from, but a nice, I think at least, a nice sort of contrast with Andrew Ross Sorkin's book, Too Big to Fail, because that was very much about the micro details of the crisis, who did what to whom and who got away with what kind of loot. Our book is trying to say, step back, look at this over 200 years, look at over the last 30 years, particularly since the Reagan Revolution, see how exactly did finance get so big and so powerful in this iteration, and how was a big, overly powerful financial sector dealt with in the past, in previous episodes of American history, and what lessons can we draw from that? And as you might guess, our view is too big to fail is too big to exist.
The Republicans will say, look, we have busts and booms in business for all of history. This is just absolutely normal. If anything, the problem was overregulation. Is there any shred of validity to that, or is that just a guise to cover up for the banks who have made a lot of money from this and contribute to the Republicans?
Most it's a cover-up, although, as you pointed out a moment ago, the banks also contribute to the Democrats. So it's a cover-up that works on both sides of the aisle. Essentially, it's deregulation. Now, when you deregulate and you have some very unregulated parts of the economy, parts of the financial sector, you get money moving in and out between the deregulated part and the somewhat more regulated part. And so where you see that kind of friction, you can say, aha, it's the regulation. If everything were completely deregulated, it would be fine. I think that position is ludicrous and absolutely not supported by the data.
The analogy I use, you used a couple of other analogies earlier, is I use a sports analogy. If we didn't have any refs in any of the games, my guess is that we would have a lot more fouls. And so the Republicans are basically asking for no refs. Now, I think that was, of course, part and parcel of why we had the collapse. But I want to get a sense from you, something that I still don't have as good a handle on as I think I should, which is the importance of the naked credit default swap. So the derivatives with no underlying assets, the casino gambling, if you will. Was that a small part of this, or was it a gigantic part of what caused the collapse?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that this Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, headed by Phil Angelides, might actually get to the bottom of. My sense right now, based on what we've seen, is that it was a relatively small part. I mean, the part of the iceberg that sticks out of the water, a very sharp, pointy part, that can do a lot of damage, but it's still only the tip of the iceberg. That really underneath it, and what really caused the damage was reckless risk-taking by banks that thought they could get away with it. And some of them did, of course, absolutely get away with it. They made lots of money in 2000, 2008, 2009, and I'm sure they'll do even better in 2010. So I think it's the attitudes, the failure of risk management, the excessive and arrogant behavior of the biggest banks, part of which comes through in their behavior in the credit default swap market. But I think that's just a manifestation of this deeper problem.
That's interesting. So the risk-taking leads to the problem, and obviously these derivatives are a large part of it, but so is the bigger problem then leverage? Because if we don't allow them to take that much risk with more money that they don't have, would that solve a great part of the problem?
Well, certainly if you require them to hold a lot more capital, which is the flip side of leverage,
right.
That would make a difference. And it used to be the case before the mid-1930s and before 1913, when the Federal Reserve was created, that American banks carried a lot more capital than they do today. Somewhere in the region of 20 to 40% capital to asset ratio was pretty typical. If you go back to the late 19th century.
Wow.
Now, yes, exactly. Wow. And we're arguing quite strongly that as part of the changes that should be implemented, the capital requirements across the financial sector should be increased, not back to those 19th century levels, but at least into the 20 to 25% range. And you do that over a period of time, and of course that changes the nature of payoffs from finance. It doesn't make finance unproductive or unable to operate. Remember that venture capital is a very successful part of the American financial machinery, and that's equity-type financing. And the people who put their money into venture capital funds understand that the returns will vary according to how successful the underlying investments are, and this could be very successful or not successful at all. So more equity-type payoffs from financial structures based on higher share of equity, and of course more skin in the game for shareholders. So the shareholders in this scenario should watch much more carefully over the bank executives.
You know, I have 100 more questions for you, but we have only a minute left. We're talking to Simon Johnson, author of the upcoming book, 13 Bankers. So on that capital requirements, let me finish that thought. What's the chances that we get real legislation there? Are they working towards that? Is it realistic in the short term to be able to get the kind of capital requirements you're talking about, or what's the numbers they're pushing for?
The number they're pushing for is the number that Lehman Brothers had the day before it failed, about 11 or 12%. So they'll get that, but you have to ask at the end of the day, isn't that what Lehman Brothers had right before they failed? Okay. Which clearly didn't do them or us very much good.
All right. Simon Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.